Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the regular session of council for November the 23rd, 2021. I'll call the meeting to order. This meeting is being live streamed on the town's YouTube channel. If you wish to access the agenda, you can follow along at on our website. You'll find the link to the agenda for this evening's meeting. Before I look for an adoption of the agenda, I would ask for two things to be dealt with before we do that. I'd like to move 13.2 to follow 12.5. Second matter that I would like to have is we have had a request that we received this morning at around 9:30 from a resident to speak to item 12.4. I believe the clerk has circulated the information from the resident, and so it will be up to council to make the decision to adjust the agenda to receive the deputation. So moved, Councillor Pennell. Seconded by Councillor Norrie. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Now, I don't know whether we're going to be able to, I think then too, I still want to adopt the agenda as amended, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Councillor Pennell.
Madam Mayor, Madam Clerk, I have a conflict of interest with 12.5 and 13.2 due to a family member.
Thank you, Councillor Pennell, and you've registered that online in the registry as well, I'm sure.
That I have, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. With that, we'll go to number 4, which will be the public meeting under the Planning Act. I need a resolution to convene the public meeting. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, Councillor McCormack. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. I believe as well, and I see it on the screen that it's coming in, we do have some people coming in by Zoom and in person to deal with some of the things to do with this public meeting. We'll just wait till Melissa gets hooked up. I see Jonathan's in. Oh. And we've got Chris up above. Okay, everybody in place? You can hear us again, those that are coming in by Zoom?
Yes, thank you. I'm hoping you can hear me as well.
Yes, yeah. Is everybody just wants to test it so that we know that we've got volume if we're asking you any questions? Guess we'll just have to depend on it. Okay.
Testing.
Great, thank you.
Good. Okay.
Okay, Michael, do you wish to speak first, or is there someone that's going to speak to this on the Canadian Tire's behalf?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll turn it over initially to Mr. Jonathan Roger to introduce the proposal on behalf of Canadian Tire. Mr. Leclerc, who is behind me, is again working on behalf of the town in a review capacity from a planning perspective, and may be able to answer any in-depth technical questions that council may have regarding the application. If we cannot answer, then I'm sure Mr. Roger or their team may be able to answer any questions that council may have as well. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Roger now, and we can go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we did have a presentation that we had sent, so I'm hoping that might be available to be shown on the screen.
I think Brianna's bringing it up right now, Jonathan. for
Okay,
you.
wonderful. I have the YouTube open on my other screen, but it's a lag, so I can't see what's on the screen, but so hopefully you'll bear with me as we go along here.
Jonathan, are you able to share your screen by chance? You should be able to.
I
operate
can,
the
if that's
presentation.
easiest. Let me just make sure I have it ready here.
There we go.
So everyone can see that?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I can't see it on my screen, so I trust that everybody can see, so that's great. So I'm Jonathan Roger from Zelenka Priamo in the city of Toronto. We represent the applicant, Canadian Tire Corporation Limited. I'm joined by a couple of team members, Melissa Michelli from Canadian Tire and Chris Sidler from Lee Consulting. On behalf of Canadian Tire, Zelenka Priamo submitted an application for a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the expansion of the existing Canadian Tire store onto a portion of the Napanee Mall lands to the south. We have a brief presentation for you this evening. So I'll just, there we go. So the lands applicable to the zoning bylaw amendment application are comprised of the approximately 2.1 hectare lands known municipally as 476 Centre Street North, which are occupied by the existing Canadian Tire store and associated gas bar, and an approximately 690 square meter vacant portion of the lands located at 450 Centre Street North, which are to be acquired from Napanee Retail Centre Corp. An application for site plan approval is under review for the Canadian Tire store expansion, and an application for consent related to a lot addition for the expansion lands from Napanee Mall went to the Committee of Adjustment earlier this evening. The proposed expansion of the Canadian Tire store represents a total gross floor area of approximately 3,098 square meters, as shown in the darker gray shading on the site plan. You can see it just to the south and to the west of the existing store. The total gross floor area after expansion would be about 6,593 square meters. The existing parking configuration that features a total of 161 parking spaces, including 4 accessible parking spaces, is proposed to be modified to accommodate 194 spaces, including 8 accessible spaces. There are 5 existing accesses to the lands, with 2 driveways from Jim Kimmett Boulevard, 2 driveways from Centre Street North, and an internal configuration to Napanee Mall to the south. An additional internal connection to Napanee Mall is proposed, while a new dedicated northbound left turn lane is proposed for the eastern driveway to Jim Kimmett. Elevations were prepared for the proposed expansion, and you can see here at the top, the east elevation shows the front entrance to the store with modifications to align with the latest Canadian Tire design. According to the official plan, the subject lands are designated arterial commercial, where the Canadian Tire store and associated expansion are permitted. The existing Canadian Tire store lands are zoned arterial commercial exception 21, and the expansion lands are zoned arterial commercial exception 1. There are 2 minor variances applicable to the Canadian Tire store lands. The purpose of the requested zoning bylaw amendment has several components. First is to rezone the approximately 690 square meter expansion lands from C21 to C221. Second, for the Canadian Tire store lands to provide for site-specific regulations related to the number of minimum required parking spaces, the minimum required accessible parking spaces, the minimum width and area for 4 accessible parking spaces in compliance with AODA, minimum distance between an interior side lot line and any driveway for non-residential uses, gross leasable area for retail, and the required minimum interior yard for the Frost House, which is in the garden center that would be on the expansion lands. Third, for the existing gas bar and convenience store, is to provide for site-specific regulations related to the existing minimum front yard, the existing minimum setback from Centre Street North line, the center line, and the existing minimum distance between any portion of a gas pump island or gasoline pumps to Center Street North. And fourth, to add the permission for the existing mobile eating establishment established under a minor variance, and to provide for site-specific regulations related to the existing minimum interior side yard, the existing minimum exterior side yard, and the existing minimum setback from the Center Street line along Jim Gimmett Boulevard. So in conclusion, the lands are well suited for the proposed Canadian Tire expansion, and the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is consistent with and conforms to the applicable provincial and municipal land use planning policies and represents good land use planning. We're available for any questions and would like to reserve the opportunity to address any comments from the public. Thank you. That ends my presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Council, any questions directed? Yeah, Deputy Mayor Kaiser?
Thank you, Your Worship. Jonathan, in the one report that we received as part of our agenda, it specified 194 parking spaces and 6 disability, but you listed 190, sorry, it said 198 plus 6. You said 194 plus 8. There was a change there. Was there a change to increase the number of disability from 6 to 8? And can you just talk about that briefly, please?
Yes, in terms of the most recent submission for site plan approval, there were 194 parking spaces proposed, and at the request of staff, the number of accessible spaces was increased from 6 to 8 spaces.
Okay, very good. And secondly, just for clarification, the current Canadian Tire site has a garden center which takes up a portion of the parking area and has for years. This new layout would remove that. So in fact, we would actually, and I say we, the customer, would actually enjoy the entire parking lot as it was originally designed. So even though it provided 161 spaces, it'll actually gain all of those and more.
That's correct. The temporary garden center that had been operating in the parking lot will no longer be operating.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Pennell?
Through you, Mayor, thank you very much. I think this question would go to Mr. Leclerc. While I was reading the many pages of the traffic study, as we all are aware, that's a very busy corner. I'm just wondering, there was a remark on there that the software that was used was outdated, and I just want to make sure that under our review that the town is good with the numbers that were provided to us.
I can address that.
Okay.
The comment that you would have read was likely in response to a former peer review comment. So the peer review comment would have pertained to a former submission of the traffic study that identified some issues which were then addressed. So under the most recent traffic study that's been submitted, those concerns have been addressed related to the software and the final numbers. Our peer review traffic consultant is in agreement with the outcome and the conclusions of that traffic report as it stands now. So it may have just been a former comment that was noticed.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Councillor Norrie?
Just curious, I was reading the traffic study too, and like I said, this isn't like a city, so it's not bad along there, but how did they come up with the 60-second delay? I think it was on Saturdays. Was it the town deciding, or was it ours investigation or theirs?
The traffic study itself would have been undertaken by the proponent, and Mr. Sidler from Lee Consulting would be able to answer any technical questions pertaining to the traffic study. So since Canadian Tire engaged Lee Consulting to do the work for the traffic study, we had GHD Limited undertake the peer review, and that's where any issues were addressed in the peer review of that study. So if there's any specific traffic related questions, Mr. Sidler would be able to address those for council.
So, okay, go ahead, sir.
If the question could just be repeated, I didn't quite catch it.
Well, in my reading, my light reading of this short letter he had. The 60-second delay, they said, I think on Saturdays, I guess from getting out of the new exit to go westbound. I guess they take into account what happens eastbound from Walmart. There's no lights there. We all know what it's like on weekends. I mean, it's not a city like the Canadian Tire on Gardner's, but for this town, that's could be confusing. I mean, if the town was in agreement with that, that's fine. If we had our own study, I was just curious about that part.
Yeah. So to respond to that, yes. So we take into consideration both the traffic that is on Jim Kimmett, going both in the east and west directions, as well as the traffic that is exiting the plaza on the north side of Jim Kimmett, as well as the traffic that is exiting out of the Canadian Tire Plaza. So all that traffic is put through a computer-generated model that works on some statistical backgrounds as to how the vehicles are entering into the intersection. And then it begins to calculate the delay that is calculated for each individual vehicle as it moves through the intersection, and outputs an overall summary for an average delay experienced at that particular movement. So that's generally how the delays are calculated at each of the intersections, specifically for those movements.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor McCormack?
Thank you, Worship. Just a follow-up to Councillor Norrie's question. So after these recent studies were done, at what point do we think we might be looking at traffic lights coming out of Walmart on Jim Kimmett?
So the Walmart Plaza was not included in our study area. That was much further west down Jim Kimmett. So we considered the driveways, both the east and west plaza driveways out of the Canadian Tire, and the intersection at Center and Jim Kimmett.
Okay,
as well as sorry?
Sorry, I understand that. I'll rephrase it because I think the intersection going into Walmart is probably going to be the best location to have traffic lights down the road. So my question is more, at what volume, when do you think the volume is going to reach a point where some kind of traffic control is going to be required?
I may be able to answer that. So the most recent expansion that took place at Walmart around 10-ish years ago, there was a clause included in the site plan agreement at that time that keeps Walmart on the hook for upgrades to their intersection as a result of increased traffic to their site specifically. So Canadian Tire would have reviewed traffic coming from Walmart, from Center Street, from many different directions, entering and exiting their site and its impacts on adjacent controlled intersections. For the Walmart site specifically, that traffic review at the time, approximately 10 years ago, would have been looking at specifically Walmart. It was identified that there's likely going to be a need to do some upgrades at that, and so at some point in the future. The clause specifically in the site plan agreement states to when traffic lights are warranted through review. So staff have undertaken or engaged a consultant to review the current volumes coming and going from Walmart to see if there is a warrant for installation of those lights. At the time, approximately 2 years ago, it was not yet warranted, but we can certainly undertake another review, in the short term to determine if there are warrants now, for example, if there's increased traffic flow to and from Walmart that may trigger the need for those upgrades.
Okay, just one more.
Certainly.
It's just a personal question regarding the landscaping. Why is it that we continue to plant leaf trees in more abundance than evergreens, to use a layman's term?
I would defer to Mr. Roger or Mr. Leclerc on that.
Are you speaking in specific to the Canadian Tire or in general?
Well, I see from the landscape diagram a whole bunch of different kind of trees, evergreens and leaf trees of different kinds. Since we're talking about this tonight, I just wonder, generally speaking, but in this particular case, why we don't consider putting evergreens in more than leaf trees.
I think the landscape architect who designed the landscape isn't at the meeting this evening. But in general, they like to have a mix of deciduous and evergreen trees. in different locations. Part of that is just to provide some screening along the street and landscape buffers, and to provide a variety of trees and species as well. It gives it a more full look, and the colors in the wind in the fall and those kinds of things. So it's part of the kind of the landscape design and the entirety of the look that they're going for.
All right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Johnson, and then I'll go to Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a question. I just wanted to provide a comment. I know that this project has been going on for several years, and there have been a lot of staff and Canadian Tire and consultant hours put into it. And I wanted to thank everyone for working together to reach a plan that will work for all parties involved, and also to thank the mall owners for willing to sell some of their property to help make this process complete. I think everyone in town is looking forward to this expansion greatly.
I think we'd all agree to that. Deputy Mayor Kaiser?
Thank you, Your Worship. Jonathan, during your presentation, I thought you mentioned a left turn lane to be installed, and was I interpreting that as the Center Street exit at the northern Center Street exit?
If I can share my screen again, if that's okay.
If that's the quickest way, sure.
Sure. Just that the visual side of things is always nice. So let me just zoom in there if people can see the zooming in aspect. Oh, so I haven't shared yet. There, it's not very clear there. Can everybody see the screen now?
Yeah.
So this is just pulled from the presentation.
Okay.
You can see the front of the store here. The existing entrance to Jimmy Kimmett is in this location, and so the idea is that a left turn, left out would be added to that intersection, and a right out as well. And that way it can have queuing for left outs here, and then people who want to go right, they can go that way. And of course, there's the existing entrance to Jim Kimmett for the loading as well in this location. I'm hoping that answers your question.
It certainly does, and I was actually, when you mentioned it, I interpreted it at the other side of the parking lot, so I'm pleased to see it there. I think it makes more sense, but I'm glad to know that you're thinking about that sort of thing to help with the egress from the parking lot from in all directions. Thank you.
Okay.
I would add, just further to that comment, the traffic study did identify, and Mr. Leclerc can expand on it, there is a level of service that staff haven't seen in traffic studies elsewhere in the town. So it's a level of service F, where A is good. There's not a lot of queuing. There's not a lot of wait time. F is further down the scale. So we have identified that there is a lengthier delay that we haven't yet seen at that left out area. So we're still looking at ways in which we can mitigate the queuing. It's only a short queue. I believe it's a 2-car queue. And Mr. Sidler can confirm that for us. But the length of time that those 2 cars are waiting to turn left out is lengthier than we've seen elsewhere. But it is, unfortunately, as a consequence of growth, we've got a lot going on in this area, and many larger cities, as I believe Councillor Norrie alluded to, it's unfortunately a consequence of growth. We do have to, at some point, get used to a little bit more delay than we're used to currently, but we are looking at ways in which we can hopefully mitigate that and reduce the wait time.
Okay. Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Was there any consideration just on the north side of the Canadian Tire between the 2 exits? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there may be an electrical vehicle charging stations there now, which wasn't there not that long ago. How does that affect the traffic study, if it affects it at all, under the understanding or the anticipation that there may be more vehicular traffic in that parking lot to charge up with the electrical charging stations?
Particularly in this specific location on the site.
Specific location on the site, that's correct, yes.
Yes, and again, Mr. Sidler can confirm, but I believe that was taken into consideration looking at the architectural site plan. Those 2 electric vehicle spaces are identified, so they would have been included in the review of the site, the traffic study as well, particular to this location on the site. yes, there will be a little bit more traffic in that area, but staff do understand that, you know, if there's a queue at that new left turn out on the eastern side of the property going on to Jim Kimmett, there would be the opportunity for some cars to, you know, go to the more westerly exit as well, just to kind of avoid that queue. But still, we see that same level of service, even if that were to occur, just due to the amount of traffic on Jim Kimmett in both east and westbound directions.
Go ahead.
And just as a follow-up, is there any anticipation of further charging stations to go in there? And will that cause any further traffic issues in that location?
Staff are not aware of any. I'll defer to Canadian Tire for any future plans.
No, there's no further plans for additional EV spaces. Those 2 spaces represent the program that Canadian Tire desires in this location.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? So, we've got everyone here. So go ahead, Michael.
I'll just add, if there's nothing further, staff will come back with a recommendation report, most likely at the next meeting, which is mid-December. Within that report, we will identify any mitigating measures that we've identified to help hopefully reduce that queuing at that left turn out onto Jim Kimmett, and provide that for council's consideration as well.
Council, anything further? So people that are listening to this tonight, the process from here is, this has been the public meeting. People still have right up and until the ability to have either questions or comments put into you. Okay.
Those can be submitted up until the moment of the decision.
Okay. All right, if there's nothing further, then I would take a resolution, please, to adjourn the public meeting. Councillor McCormack, Councillor Richardson, all in favor of that motion. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening. It's been very informative.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Okay, we have this evening no presentations, but we do have a deputation. And I think that Mr. Zetterberg has gone in to retrieve the resident that wanted to speak to us. Okay, Council. Good evening, Mr. Lucas. Thank you for joining us this evening. I think you probably are well aware of what the limitation for time is, but your deputation should be limited in speaking to not more than 10 minutes. And then hopefully we'll see what the questions can handle after that. So please go ahead.
Thank you, members of council. I'm not really here to make a full presentation tonight. I just happened to pick up this report to council on the weekend. So my summary tonight is just to basically ask for this council to host public meetings to deal not only with the representation of our election, but also how we vote. So very quickly, I confirm that everyone has their email. Paragraph number 2 pretty well summarizes what I want to talk about tonight, and that's the fact that we need to have public consultation on any proposed election proposals for next year. On the representation side, I just want to remind council, we've had several recorded votes in the past terms of council on how to best represent our taxpayers, and the last 2 votes were in fact 4-3 votes to maintain status quo. I think this issue deserves another vote of council. I think this issue deserves to have another public input, because it's that razor thin, and term to term conditions might change, and we might finally actually end up supporting a system that our neighbors to the north did, Stone Mills, which is elections at large. The other thing is When it comes to the election itself, we have had 2 contentious elections using online voting. I'm very concerned about the process to do it. We all know our voters list comes from the impact assessment list, which have never been correct. We all know that we've been issuing PIN numbers to people. The first time we did it two elections ago, it was a complete disaster because there's no check and balance with the PIN system. Last time we had a 2-level procedure checklist, and for a savvy person who wanted to take advantage of that, it wouldn't be hard to break that code in terms of collecting them, checking people out on social media, using the birth dates that they can find. And also I'm concerned with the lack of in-person voting. We don't know who votes with those cards because it could be a family member, it could be someone else who's a grandparent or something else. So I'm very concerned with how we are going to proceed with online voting. As I said in my letter, I've made specific inquiries to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. I've sent them a detailed letter. I'm waiting for a reply back. There are minuses to this system as well. The agencies that provide the service to municipalities like us, in fact, are not regulated. We don't have a system for recount on electronic balloting only, and I'm not comfortable with the fact that we are actually forcing people to vote by a PIN pad, and in many cases getting help to do that. I've had many years of experience at provincial, federal, and municipal levels. Paper ballots is the rule of thumb for provincial and federal elections. Very stringent, very accountable. I worry about what we're doing here. Just not Napanee, but in general. And these are concerns I've made to the municipality. So my request tonight is that the council delay whatever proposal you're looking to do, seek at least one public meeting on both the representation aspect as well as the voting. If you notice in your report tonight, for example, here's how much things have changed. In the current ward system, you have a 35% difference in representation between wards 3 and 5. Which means one person represents that much more. So even the current system we have, in my opinion, is not very good. And as I've argued for many terms of council, the ward system is not historically correct, nor does it really offer the chance for people to vote for everything. Every person in this municipality can only vote for 3 out of 7 people. Now, if there's acclamations for mayor, deputy mayor, and councillor for a particular ward, those people won't be voting at all. So I just want to ask the council to delay whatever decisions you're making, host at least one public meeting, get some more input, because I know there's lots of good comments out there for our municipality in general. Anyways, I'm happy to answer some questions. I have more stuff, but I can't possibly cover it in 10 minutes.
Council, any questions? Councillor Pennell?
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Sean, for coming in and talking with us tonight. Just something that you mentioned about with the electronic voting that you've witnessed, or there was people that were helped in the voting. I just want to remind everybody that with the paper voting that happens as well. I did happen to work the election, just recent election, and there's lots of people that go behind the screen and help them on paper as well. So I just want to bring a balance to that statement as well.
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
If I just may clarify, I've seen people go, it takes an hour and a half to process someone, and having someone manipulate 6, 7, 8, 9 steps on an iPad is a lot more difficult than just going behind a booth and marking an X. And I also have been a scrutineer at the federal provincial level. So that's kind of the lack of options I'm concerned with that we need to revisit. Thank you.
Anything else from council? No, nothing? Okay, thank you very much. I will look for a motion to note and receive Mr. Lucas's deputation. Councillor Norrie, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Seven, adoption of the minutes of the regular session of the council, November the 9th, 2021. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes of the special session of council dated November the 17th. Moved by Councillor Norrie, Deputy Mayor Kaiser, all in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Correspondence. Correspondence for information. Dated November the 23rd. You have a recommendation to note and receive, but of course you always have the option of pulling. Councillor Johnson?
Mayor, can we please pull the resolution from the municipality of Matisse
Okay,
with
first-
regards to the impact taxes?
First, I'll get a motion to receive, and then we'll start pulling. So, Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Councillor Johnson, you wish to have something pulled and speak to it?
Yes, I would like to have the letter from the municipality of Matisse with their resolution to their resolution regarding how upset they are that the government continues to use impact values based on 2016 and postpone the province-wide assessment update for 2022 and 2023. I think it's important for our municipality and every municipality to have a taxation based on a more current level.
So you would like to receive and support?
Receive and support, and can we send a letter in that regard as well, please?
Okay. Any comments?
I'll second.
Seconding it, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Any comments of anyone? Deputy Mayor Kaiser?
Well, I don't know the process inside and out, obviously, but as so much of our society has moved to remote working, and I can't imagine much of the assessments are done on the ground anyways. Most of them are done from office spaces or from historic data and comparing apples and oranges and pears and peaches. So I don't know why they need to keep postponing it. It's I get it in 2020 when the pandemic was new and fresh, everything was up in the air, but by this time they should be able to figure out how to get that stuff done.
Any further comments, or would our finance department or our CAO wish to make comments on the process? Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. So I guess in this instance, I would put in that Councillor Johnson, what she's saying is true. Basically, our tax system works that the whole value or the current value assessment is divided into the amount of taxes that the municipality needs. So if there are some properties that are maybe not in line with current standards, they may be carrying a larger portion of that tax base or a lesser portion, depending on what the circumstances are. So an updated roll or a fresh outlook of the value of the properties would provide more consistency across the board. Most of them are still being done remote by MPAC. They've updated their technology quite a bit to be able to do a good portion of it, but I believe they are still doing some drive-bys and some walk-arounds on the outside of the property to identify maybe some outbuildings or things along that line. I believe that at some point they're going to be in person, but at this point, I believe it would be more reactionary to requests or complaints or concerns from municipalities. I'm not sure if my ramblings are helping or distracting, but that's kind of where we are. They are hoping to be back to standard processes at some point in the future. It's never going to be exactly what it was before. It's always going to be a bit of a hybrid model. But I know that I did put something in a communication to the public that the new assessments are going to be coming out at the end of this month. So I would point out to residents if they don't feel that their assessment is right, there is a deadline for the request for reconsideration for that. I'm not sure exactly what else to add, if the CEO had something to add, or if you think that was complete. Okay, great.
Thank you. And I guess too, and I'm trying to get my mind around this too, does the county bill us, impact bills them, the county, the upper tier, and do we get billed?
It's the county that pays the full amount. So the residents pay for it, but it's just collected by the county.
Divided per capita.
Yeah.
And I'm sure with all, this is a Roger Cole statement, and for anybody out in the audience that remembers Deputy Mayor Cole, who just had a love-hate relationship with MPAC, is I'm sure that because MPAC hasn't been doing this work, that I'm sure that they're charging us a lot less money as well.
I can't confirm or deny that.
Sorry, that was just for Deputy Mayor Cole's benefit. Thank you very much.
One more comment, if I may, Your Worship. The longer the time frame between updates, the greater the potential shift. And when I say that in 2016, agriculture in this community saw a average of a 194% increase over 2012. When you take that over 6, 7, 8 years, the potential for a shift in the pieces of pie that each sector of the taxed properties could shift greater. The impacts could be larger. In the end, it wasn't 194% increase in taxes, as our GM of Finance would explain, but the valuations can shift so much more given the greater period of time.
Just scares people when they see it too.
Yep.
So I have a mover and a seconder. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Correspondence for action. Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. It is before us with some suggestions. I don't know who's going to speak to this, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's going to be Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
First, I think it's funny that a letter penned by two women ministers was addressed to His Worship, Margaret. But anyways, we have a proposal of development in the works in our community. I think as you know, there's a potential there for an actual facility to be incorporated in that. I'm not sure of the impact across the entire livestock in the area, but certainly I think it's interesting to see. I don't think that this was a huge impacting thing in our community in this part of the province. I think it was a greater impact in other areas, but I'm not fully versed in it.
Well, it is out there, and I'm sure that any economic development people have been on this just to make sure that everyone is aware of the changes and the possibilities within it. So I guess with that, I just would like to have a motion to receive, please. Councillor McCormack, Deputy Mayor Kaiser. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Any unfinished business? I do have one. I just have to switch screens here. Something that I would like discussed this evening under unfinished business, because we just don't seem to be able to get a good footing on what it is. And please just bear with me for a second. I apologize. We've had some deputations and certainly a lot of work put out by staff and also put out by council to do with the boat launch. We really have not come to a complete and utter decision on it, simply because we know that we've got a waterfront study to go. We've got a lot of strategic priorities to try and get in this, and it's become almost, unfortunately, a Hatfield and McCoy sort of thing. You know, it needs to be a shared service that's going to be, it's going to be good for everybody. We need to have a state-of-the-art boat launch within the municipality, within the town, so that people can do their business here and so on. As both sides of the fence will say, is if we had been doing enforcement right from the start, we wouldn't be here. If we'd had enforcement down there in 2014, we wouldn't be in the position that we are. But I guess what I would like to look at, and I'm just going to put this out to council maybe for some discussion, doesn't have to be a decision tonight, but we are now going into trying to make sure that we've got businesses that are going to survive, whether they're uptown, downtown, whether they're on the waterfront, whether we're allowing people to be down at the waterfront to walk. And I don't think that from a certain date on that there will be the need for 10 parking spots for boats and trailers. And I'd take any advice on that. But I would like to see that we could reduce some of those so that other patrons and other users of the facilities down there would be able to park in that for the time being, only on the assumption that A, we have a plan in place for trying to get something in place for, better enforcement, better parking, better in and out. Is that the place for it by next spring? And as soon as people want to start putting their boats in, we need to pull those signs back off. So I'd be willing to listen to any conversation, but I really think with the number of phone calls that I am getting and the number of emails that I'm getting, even though I say to them, did you see that it was a trailer and boat parking spot? And then they look out at the fact that there hasn't been anybody parked in those spots for a while. Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Thank you, Your Worship. We spoke briefly about this on the phone the other day, and the idea of having it not available for boat launching parking in January, February, March makes easy sense. The water's pretty stiff. It's hard to launch a boat. How early in December would you consider it? So on the weekend on Hay Bay, I observed 2 to 3 dozen boats, and along the high shore, along the Long Reach, several dozen more. Fishing activity is huge. There's a lot of charters coming down from Bay of Quinte, what have you. One comment I had with one fisherman who's a neighbor of mine who was out there among those was he'll be fishing until the water's too stiff for his boat. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's a date to say when it frees up until mid-April or something like that. Certainly once the water starts to freeze up, it's pretty obvious nobody's launching a boat, and at that point saying, it's fair game for every vehicle to park here, I don't think that's unreasonable at all. The question is, what's the right date? Middle of December, 1st of December might be a little early. Certainly January, February, March, and probably first half of April are more than reasonable to say you don't need to be parking boat trailers down here.
And I'd have no idea what a perfect date would be. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Worship. I'm going to take a different view on it in the fact that we've had nothing but difficulties with respect to enforcement and compliance down there now. My concerns is that when we start flipping back and forth and changing signs, the people that park down there in January are going to expect to park down there in April. And that's what my concern. I would be less concerned with it if we had the compliance, but we've had this discussion many times here, and each and every time I drive over that bridge to go home, I see violations, and it's during the day, it's during the night. So my concern is that any traction that we may have gained with the enforcement that we have had down there, we're going to lose over the course of the winter if we open it up and just say park where you want to. So that would be my concerns. It's obvious that there won't be anybody launching a boat down there. Well, I would say we shouldn't be, but I know the bay in front of my house opens up in January when we get that 2 weeks of rain. So, and I know how avid fishermen are because I'm one of them. So, but my biggest concern is the non-compliance that's happening. And if we start flipping signs back and forth, are we creating more trouble than the spots that we have. I mean, I have no problem. We have vehicular parking down there, the 10 or 12. We have 3 or 4 handicap parking down there, which we've opened up to whoever wants to use them, whether it's the patrons at the restaurant or people using the dock. But my concerns are flipping back and forth and putting time frames on it. I just feel that we'll be changing signs, and we'll be starting back where we are now in March or April of next year with trying to get the compliance down there that we just haven't got yet, so.
Okay, and I certainly, I cannot disagree with you. I just, I hate to see spaces wasted, and it's not just for the restaurant. I mean, it's certainly other people that use it too, when the river is, as you say, solid. But you're right, Councillor Richardson, going back and forth doesn't help either. Look at what the enforcement of parking on lawns and parking on boulevards and so on, and that certainly has set the tone. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Worship. 2 things. The older building just on the other side of Center Street that's slated for demolition.
The Yellow House?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Would that not be appropriate for additional parking spaces to remedy the wanting of the use of the boat ramp area? Like, it's a boat ramp. Just confine it to parking for both, like vehicles and trailers for boaters, a certain section of it, and then put some additional parking on the other side for the pedestrians that want to walk up the hill and go in town or whatever, or cross over and go for lunch. And the other thing is, this has been going on, as you said, for quite a while, all sorts of comments and whatnot. Who's leading the charge on this? I mean, do we have a committee? How are we going to resolve this? Possibly we need to have a group of designated people, council, staff, and have a committee and get to the bottom of it, make a decision, come back to council with 1 or 2 proposals so we can vote on it and then get on with it. I know that some of the council members, including yourself, were down there months ago speaking to people and looking at the situation. So I think we're dragging our heels, not intentionally, but if we did have a committee that was dedicated to resolving this, we might get to a proper solution.
Okay. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
All right. Well, I had a comment that I forgot to mention earlier, and another one that came up as Councillor Richard was speaking. The first one is, during the budget process, it was presented to us the idea of emergency services having a boat. Whether that hasn't been approved yet, but should that get approved, if we have a boat launch within town, we have to do better on all fronts to preserve that access at all times for emergency services, not just for us, but for the OPP as well. But certainly if we're going to approve a boat, then we darn well better make sure that they have access when they need access, and they don't have time to go looking and thinking if they have access. They need to know. But on the other point was, Councillor Richardson spoke about violations, and certainly it's been observed by many. Interestingly, I don't think we saw as many violations in the previous arrangement prior to our adjustment that we made in the summer. The previous arrangement, yeah, there was a few times people would go past the concrete blocks and park in that area, but I think that worked better, just as a thought, just as a comment, and just going to leave it at that.
I'll go with Councillor Pennell. I really didn't mean to get this long on this, but I think it's something that, because we're all getting tons and calls, and to me it is unfinished because we haven't made a foot forward in it. Councillor Pennell, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for my 2 cents on this, I'm going to look at it as that parking lot as being seasonal. So therefore, as we've heard tonight, that the water gets hard, there'll be less boats, but also, I'm just going to say it, there's less people on the patio as well. So therefore, for the little bit of traction that would be lost for us to switch out the signs and allow parking to be there, I think that it would hurt us more in the long run for those extra little bit of cars that could park there. So I think that we should not flip-flop on this.
Okay. No, and point taken. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question, and because I honestly don't know the answer to this. People go ice fishing. Is that boat launch ever used to launch snowmobiles in the wintertime for ice fishing? and launch was the wrong word, but
We've had airplanes, but I don't know about zoos. Go ahead, Councillor Richard.
Just to Alan's comment, it's possible, but not probable. But it could happen. Realistically, it could happen. But just to go back to it, I mean, we've come up with a plan that I think we're trying to be fair to everybody. We provided vehicular parking down there, which are 10 or 12 spots. We provided at least 10 or 12 spots with the trailers and the trucks. We've tried to maintain it, to keep it open so that it is manageable for the boats of today's world, not only the 14-foot aluminums, but the 24-foot pontoon boats. And that was the idea of it, was to make it functional, but trying to be fair with it. So I guess the difficult part is that we've got two competing, as you started the conversation with, is that we've got two competing, very passionate groups that want a piece of a very small piece of property. And I'm trying, like I say, I think we've been more than fair in the fact that we've tried to provide something for everybody down there, whether the vehicular park is used for the restaurant or it's used for the people that just want to go down and sit on the dock, which happens. It really does, because it's a good place. And you know, and just as an aside, with our FICE meeting today, there was a lot of talk and generation or information we received from our sister community in Brighton that we're very impressed with our waterfront, and it's something that we do have to expand. I mean, the reality of it is that we do have to come up with a much bigger, more robust plan for along the river there, both on the east and west side of Center Street. So, but again, we've got a very small piece of property that we have very passionate people competing on, and you know, I think we're trying to be fair with it. We're trying to be open. We're trying to be fair. We're trying to make it functional, because, like I say, it's easy for the people just going to go down and park and go into the restaurant. It's not so much easier for the folks that have the bigger boats that are trying to maneuver down around there. So the whole idea of the concept that we have was to keep it open and make it a functional boat ramp that provides parking for anyone that wants to use it. So again, it's one of those, there probably is no right answer, and we just have to try and find the righter answer, I guess. So.
Yeah. And I guess maybe I had prefaced this with, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that council don't direct staff as to what it is. We had plans come forward. We accepted one. But lots of times staff with boots on the ground see things that they need to change because it's just not going to work in that. So along with all of council, I'm at least assuming all of council, we want a boat launch in town that works, that's safe, but adjust to the need too. But we also need to make sure that other people can use it too. And I don't think I've ever been given the answer as to, is it a designated municipal parking lot? Who gave it to us? For what purpose? And I don't know whether has council ever had that actual, answer, which might help to dictate what it can be used for. Two hands went up. Go ahead, Councillor Pennell, and then I'll go to Councillor Richardson.
Sure.
Mine was going to be really quick.
Okay.
We advertise it on our web. Yeah, I know you're laughing because I'm never very quick with anything, but we advertise it on our website as a boat launch.
Yep.
I mean, it's a boat launch. So.
Yeah, the same as our others. Yeah, I guess maybe that would be a simple answer, and I could come back with you and say, but we advertise it as a downtown too. So, go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that I'm just thinking of Mr. Stokes right now. He's probably jumping up and down. I do believe he provided that information to us in his report as to how we ended up with that parking lot.
Okay, I'll go back and look at that. I did look at that, and I didn't see in his report that it was.
I thought that he did. My other thing is, I just jotted down that later on the agenda we'll be looking at the CAO's priority list, and who would think that putting a parking lot on the priority list? But I'll be asking for that. One of the things I was wondering is, I'd just like to remind people as well is that when we did received that report to configure the parking lot the way it is now, that was strictly temporary, just to get us through the season. So by all means, it's not permanent. But one thing that keeps coming up regarding that is that until we can have that paved and put markings on the pavement, it's always going to be a little bit of adjustment here or there. So I'm just wondering if we could ask staff if we could get a budgetary figure that we could start to maybe work on to put some monies away into reserves so we can look at that sooner than later.
Okay, all right. Well, I know I've opened up a can of worms, and I wasn't asking for a decision tonight. I guess I just want to make sure that we keep this moving forward so that there is a solution that does work for everybody, not just one party, and get rid of some of the things that, the comments that are made about the tour boat that sits in front of a public dock. That's not a public dock. That dock is privately owned. And Jeepers brings a lot of people into town. I know they have to park somewhere, but we'll get over that. Okay, I'm through with that. I'm not looking for any direction. I want to keep it moving forward. Mr. Pinsent, would you like to say something?
Yeah. If I may, Your Worship, I know the clerk's done some research into the provenance of that property, who owns it, whether it's in the BIA. I think it's obvious to council what didn't work this year. We're going to start the process actually tomorrow at our SLT in terms of looking at how we close off this year with the construct of that boat ramp and look at how we start the year in April or May with a better solution. So it's on our radar. It's not simply the boat launch. It's in the BIA. Who else parks there? What are abutting and adjoining lands used for? I think there's some issues we could talk to Mr. Nobes about in terms of what a restaurant would normally get in terms of a site plan approval with the number of parking lots. So there's many issues with this. So I think what we should do is come back as part of our business planning process next year and make sure council and the residents understand all of the inputs into this decision before we make recommendations and come back with something that council accepts as satisfactory to the community, understanding that not everybody will be happy, but we'll try and do something that makes sense.
Perfect. Result done. I just want to keep it moving forward. Thank you very much. Any other unfinished business? We have a staff report for acknowledging special events. Now that, Jessica, are you doing that one for us? I'm off my screen here for my agenda, so.
Yes, Your Worship, this staff report initially went to the last council meeting, but as Councillor McCormack was unable to be with us, council passed a resolution to defer, so that is why you're seeing it under unfinished business.
Okay. So do you wish to deal with it now, or do you wish to deal with it by the notice of motion?
This report is just for council's information to provide some additional context. I believe we are just looking for a note and receive on that report, unless there are questions.
Okay. Council, any questions on Jessica's report for the policy for acknowledging special events? Yep.
Thank you, Worship. And I'll go to the last paragraph, the alternatives. I'm happy with that. I think it's fair to give staff more time to look into this and come up with alternative ideas. I was thinking of L&A Mutual having done a great job painting the silos. There might be walls that could be painted instead of sidewalks, but I'm just hoping that the town could be proactive and a little avant-garde in coming up with some way of recognizing causes in a unique or more visual way. So I'll leave it at that. If I can make a motion to accept the alternative proposal, to give staff the time to look into this more, then that'd be fine with me.
So to note and receive and consider a motion directing that staff investigate rather than implement a policy recognizing historical events and the special interest groups by painting a sidewalk and report back with recommendations to council by what date?
I would hope, let's say sometime in February.
Okay.
We talk about it again, maybe the first meeting in February, and see where we are.
Does that give you recommendations, a resolution that we can meet those expectations, Jessica? Yes. So that's moved by Councillor McCormack, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. That was easier than my boat launch. There is no easy answer. Committee reports. Municipal Heritage Committee, October the 14th. Recommendation that we receive and adopt the minutes from the Municipal Heritage Committee, October the 14th. Moved by Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Norrie. Comments or questions? Statements? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Activity reports. Financial services. You have the report before you. Does anyone have any questions for Paul with his report? Yeah.
Thank you, Worship. It's just nice to see consistently the reduction of the amount of tax sales that we have. I think they're doing a great job.
Yeah, sure is. Thank you. I'm sure that it's a lot of work and a lot of paperwork, but you're right. You can see the progress. It's working. Okay, nothing further, so I'll go on to infrastructure services. You do have the report before you. Any questions for infrastructure services activities? Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Worship. Could we get a little bit more explanation on the Oliver Side Road Bridge, please?
Thanks, Peter.
Through your worship, the town staff, we have submitted notice of claim to the bonding agency. So what happens now is that it's an engineering exercise to determine the scope of work that remains outstanding, and then how the procurement process is going to happen from there. So the bonding agency has a lot to say in how that happens. Unfortunately, it'll be a bit of time. This isn't something that's going to be resolved in the next couple weeks, but the wheels are in motion, so the formal procedures have started to put them on notice.
Thank you. So I think that it would be unfair of me to ask you for a time frame then, because it is early days. But maybe that's something that we could look forward to receiving at a future date is some kind of a time frame. I don't think I'd be right by asking you what the time frame would be on this.
Yeah.
So I saw some equipment being hauled out of there today.
Anything further for Peter while we've got him up here? Deputy Mayor Kaiser?
I know it's not ours, it's the county's, but can you just confirm that it's the same case over on the Morven Bridge on County Road 2?
Through your worship, yeah, that's correct. So there's two. The county has two bridges that are in the same type of condition, so there'll be different contracts, different bonding, but the same procedures. So
thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, through your worship. Peter, just on the capital works, the Cherrywood Parkland, it says in the report the staff are working on installing concrete curbing, asphalt surface fencing, and completion of the trail. Has that work now been shut down for the season, or is it still ongoing?
through your worship, I'm not sure if there's any outstanding work for this season, but the intent was to get as much as possible done so that when the equipment arrives in the spring, it can be installed quickly and get going. I'd have to ask staff for an exact update if there's anything left that can be done, but asphalt's running, we're running towards the end of an asphalt season, so if it isn't done, it's unlikely it will get done. So
I would really appreciate a report back on that because I know that the phones are going to start to ring here for that. If, whether it be maybe next meeting or something like that.
Through your worship, the intent was as soon as we have firm dates, because right now we don't have any real new information. As soon as we have firm dates on the product availability and everything, we can firm up a schedule. The intent was to update council.
Okay, anything further? Okay, thanks, Peter. Community and Corporate Services. Questions for Mr. get off easily. That's it? Okay.
Sorry, which one are we on?
We're on Community and Corporate Services. You don't want to let him get off easily.
Oh, no, he's coming up. It's just,
You do have something?
yes, I just have a question through you, Mayor. Just on the transportation survey, went looking for that today because it's coming up on November 26th is going to be the cutoff date on that. I just wanted to see if we could give a reminder to residents of where they could find the survey and maybe have a final push on it for their say.
Sorry, through your worship, we pushed it again on social media today.
Yeah.
And then when the beaver comes out on Thursday, it'll be in there again. And then I plan to do one more push by the end of the week. So far, we have 222 submissions to the survey.
Okay, great, thank you. When the beaver comes out, then the survey will be closed.
No, it'll be open for one more day, but it's been pushed in the beaver for the last month.
Okay.
It's been open, it's just kind of one of those last reminders.
Okay, great. So I'm glad to see that we're on top of it and pushing it to, because this is exciting. It's it's the residents' time to speak out and see, give their thoughts on transportation. Thank you.
Okay, nothing further. Emergency Services. Any questions of the chief with his report? Seeing nothing?
Nope.
No. Go ahead, Councillor Richardson.
It's just more of a comment than anything. It's interesting that it appears as though we don't fight fires anymore. We do everything else but, just according to the numbers, so.
That's a good thing.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing, I guess.
No, and I think that came forward to us either in something that I was in just recently, is that has become a very small part of their work because of the good prevention. Did you wish to speak to that, Chief? Or have I covered it with that?
I believe you covered it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Takes a whole different training though, all of a sudden, doesn't it? So I would take a motion to receive all the reports from the different departments. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, Councillor McCormack, all in favor of that motion. Motion is carried, thank you. CAO priorities, staff report, CAO priorities for 2022. Mr. Pinsent.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the report speaks for itself in terms of the initial piece. We have the results of the RFP for strategic planner. We have those submissions. We're looking at evaluating those, our final evaluation sometime the next week or so, coming back to council on the 14th of December with a firm to do that. In the meantime, I would like to have council's input in terms of the work that we're going to do next year without having a full strategic plan in place. A lot of these are just results of conversations with GMs, me listening to council and residents in terms of what we think are on the radar. If you look at what I'm looking for is for council to receive this now, go away and think about it. At our next meeting, if you think there's something that's missing or something you don't understand, by all means, let us know. A couple of points. There is, in a couple of places, we talk about a reorganization or an org review. I think, by and large, the org review is done at the big pieces. And we'd probably swap out the org review for a service delivery review, which will get more at how we deliver services to residents and how we sort of get down below director level opportunities. There's a couple of thrusts in here in terms of the work that we're going to do next year. There's a lot of foundational work in here in terms of what we need to do as a municipality and what any municipality would be doing to promote growth, development, and engagement with residents. And there's also a big thrust around how we serve residents, what service standards look like, and how we act as staff serving those residents within the municipality. The way these are listed, they're in no particular order. Those headings at the top in terms of management excellence, growth, livability, service standards, and partnerships are some of what you might consider as strategic outcomes or pillars of a strategic plan that I've put together just as a start point for organization. of these priorities. And I think lastly, before we have a discussion on this, hopefully, is a lot of these individual ones will be grouped and lumped together in terms of strategic work and then be assigned to general managers as deliverables in 2022. And their performance will be assessed against the attainment of those objectives. So it allows me to start a bit of a performance management framework with my direct reports as well. And lastly, of note, what we will do with the concurrence of council is, instead of seeing the activity reports that you've seen, such as those presented tonight, we will on a monthly basis present our progress towards the achievement of those priorities as listed in this report. So once we get to those on December 14th, I'm going to sit down with the GM of Finance and the other GMs and figure out how we present a business plan for 2022, which outlines each one of the organizations, its approved funding levels, and those priorities that are assigned to each one of those departments for 2022. So I'm happy to take comments, questions, or if there are any questions in terms of what some of these activities actually mean, I'm happy to take those questions.
Councillor Pannell.
Through you, Mayor, thank you. With this document, then, if we're not going to be having the reports back to council as what we just went through, now mind you, I see stuff that's on there that's been carried over, hasn't been cleaned up. That was something I was going to talk about at a later date. But if this is the type of the reports that we're going to be getting going forward, if we choose, will be coming off of this list. Therefore, my question is this a working document, or once everything's on there, it's shut down, and those are the only reports that we're going to get? My concerns with that is simply something that just came up here with Oliver Bridge. It's something that popped up. If it was on the list that was already talked about and it's been cleared off, how do we discuss that again? Does that make sense?
I think what we're trying to do is give council an opportunity to look at those big pieces of work that we're doing as staff. Council will always have the prerogative to ask staff questions of, I guess, more of a transactional nature, if that is the pleasure of council. But the intent is to try and get council thinking of the more important things as opposed to the numbers of permits and other things that we're dealing with. But at the end of the day, it's what council wants to see on a monthly basis is what staff will give them. But the idea is to focus on the more important issues.
If I may.
Certainly.
Just to follow up to that, I think it's very important that I would know that there's a major problem with something that's going on in my ward, because the phone's going to ring and I need to be up to date on that. And therefore, that's something in the reports I'd like to see. The other thing is a little concerned with the comment that you made about the organization review is pretty much done, and now you're going to just calm that down a little bit. I do believe we have a resolution on the books that we were going to get a organizational review done. And my other thing is, if this is going to, this kind of looks like a strat plan to me, looking at this report now. So how would our strat plan differ from what I'm looking at these reports?
So I'll answer the question on the org review first. So at the GM level right now, you've got finance, corporate services, growth and expansion, emergency service. Those are pretty generic across any municipality. The idea is to get down below that in terms of how these organizations interact with one another and how we discreetly provide services to residents. You tend to get that at more of a, so the service delivery review will get at the organization, and it will get at how the organization works within itself and how it serves residents. You come at it more from the bottom up as opposed to top down. So I think the end result will be an org review, but you'll get at it through how you deliver service to residents. It's how you frame it is a little bit different, but I think the outcome is going to be the same. And I think what you'll do is you'll get a better buy-in from staff, because this isn't about sort of arranging deck chairs. It's around how we actually better provide service to residents and how we can empower staff to do bigger and better things. So that's in terms of whether you call it an org review or service delivery review. I think the outcome will be the same. This is by no means any kind of a strategic plan. This is a list of 40 items, one of which is strategic plan development. but I think it's important, for me to manage 60, 70, 80 staff, however you want to count them, in a multi-million-dollar budget, delivering, a half dozen to a dozen services, that there is a plan in place of some way, shape, or form in terms of priorities endorsed by council, such that we are working towards those established priorities. It's not as articulate as a strategic plan. It's not been work that's been formally endorsed with a bunch of community involvement, but I think it's at least a start point to say, are these the important things to council, and is this the right start point to make sure that we're all doing the right thing at the right time in 2022?
Just one more. Thank you for that explanation. Just one last question for you. When you're asking us to absorb this, go back and come back with maybe some more suggestions, do you see a limit of what you want to see for amount? Like I see 40 now. What happens if that all of a sudden turns into 60 or 80?
Then I would say that's too much.
Right.
So the idea is, if you have too many priorities, you actually don't have any priorities at all. So a lot of this stuff, realistically, some of this work is probably 2 to 3 years in the making. Some of it is easy to knock off. So what I'm getting at is, I'm a new CAO here. I've got staff that are working on different things. We've done some tweaks to the organization. What is it that council is looking for, based on me being here for a couple of months, what you've seen in terms of that direction into 2022, in terms of priorities, so that we're all crystal clear in terms of what you expect of me and then what I expect of staff based on that input.
Thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not sure where. I'll start with the reporting process. I hate to say it, but I like the reporting process that we have. There's a number of items, and I'll predate Mr. Pinson, but there's a number of things, just as an example, the short-term accommodation bylaws and updates. I personally like to be updated periodically, and I think that's what the process was when we first initiated this through resolution probably a year ago, to see where we're at, because we are sort of the face of the corporation, or the face of the community. We get the calls, and I like to be updated as to where we're going with it. Not so much as an accountability thing, but just to be updated with where we are, and planning ahead is will we get this done by October, or do we need to push this back to November? So, I mean, as far as the staff reports go, I like those. I know a lot of us don't necessarily get into town hall or into a lot of the offices a lot of times. So sometimes this is the only place that we hear things or learn things. So I like those. As far as I mean, a lot of these things that are on our list are kind of run hand in hand as well, I guess, because when we talk about the official plan, the strategic plan is somewhat related, I'm thinking, to our organizational review, because if we're going to go in a specific direction, we have to have the machine to get us in that direction, which would be part of the organizational review. The utilities master plan, recreation master plan. I mean, these things are all big ticket items that, even though they sound as if they're singular, they run hand in hand with a lot of the things. So, I think probably an organizational review, whether we call it organizational review or something else, is required, because if we decide to go in a direction, we have to make sure we've got the equipment, the tools, the vehicles to go in that direction. So I wouldn't necessarily sort of put an end to the organizational review right off the hop. I guess what I'm looking at is what can we obtain realistically between now and October 24th of next year. I would like to try and clean up as many of the loose ends that we have. I would like to try and put the corporation in a direction for the future. Understanding realistically, we're not going to get to all these things. It's just, I agree with you in the fact that some of these things may be 2 or 3 or 4 years in the making. So, but I would like to, maybe at our next meeting, we can sort of figure out what are we going to accomplish, what can we start or lay the groundwork on, and just as another example, like a new town hall. We all know, I think we all understand that this isn't something that's going to be done overnight, and it isn't something that's going to be done in the next 6 or 8 or 9 months. But are we in a position to lay the groundwork for it, so that the folks that follow us are in a position to pick the ball up and run with it? So I guess that's what I'd be looking for maybe at our next meeting is where are we now? Where can we get to by the middle of next year? And if we can't get to the end of certain things, is there an ability to lay the groundwork for the things that we're not going to get completed, but at least lay the groundwork for those things going into 2023 and beyond?
So let me just, if I may, just let me address a couple of things. You know, loose ends is a pretty vague statement, right? So this is about being very precise in terms of the work that we want to do. So, and a lot of this work in terms of what you want to do before October, whatever that date is, that's what we're going to do as staff once I get the input from council, right? What is more important than other things, and we'll look at it and we'll phase it. And some of the stuff, yeah, we're not going to get to. A lot of this work is going to be done by consultants as well. So all we're doing is we're managing that activity. So it's really, you know, what we're going to do in terms of, you know, the idea here tonight is, you know, we're listening to you as you say this, and we'll take this back and start to reframe it. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to present to you. These are some of the things that we're thinking about doing, right? So it's a matter of getting that input to move forward.
And I apologize. I mean, when I say loose ends of it, there are certain things that are sort of on their books. Some of them are by resolution, be it the short-term accommodation, be it the off-road vehicle bylaw. I think what we've learned over the last 2 or 3 years is that some of the bylaws over the years have sort of, I won't say lapsed, but some of them just didn't get updated as quickly as some of us would like to. So I think what we've tried to do is, as they presented themselves, we tried to clean them up, and knowing very well that we're not going to be able to do a complete revamp of all our bylaws, but as they presented themselves, we tried to get them cleaned up. And I guess those were at the loose ends that I'm sort of referring to, is that some of the resolutions, and I know that our clerk is working diligently at cleaning up stuff that we just haven't got finished yet. I'm a big proponent of trying to leave the house as clean or cleaner for the next group as what we've got it for. So,
Councillor McCormack?
Thank you, Worship. Just to add to that, there was a time 2 years ago, whatever, it doesn't really matter, where we would bring something up, council, we would ask a question, and we would expect to hear something come back to us, and it never came back. And then we would have to ask again 2-3 months down the road, and oh yeah, you know. And so I think what Councillor Richardson is trying to get across, and I agree, is that it's nice to see it repeated on a list of items that we've put on the burner. It could be 4 years down the road, or it could be something we haven't even started looking at yet, but just that it's remembered, and it's on a list somewhere, because that's what I remember was frustrating, to bring something up, ask about something, and when you're first elected, the first year you're kind of lost, you know, you're in training. The second year you start to get your traction. The third year you're about as effective as you're going to be. And I'd hate to see us go back to the beginning of our term when you would ask something, you didn't really know the proper procedure on how to follow up with it, but it got lost. And if you didn't bring it up again, nobody else would follow up for you. So if it's on a list ongoing of items that need to be followed up, I think that's a good way to do it.
Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with what Councillor Richardson said with regards to having the reporting from the departments as something attainable that's easy for council to track. I also like what you have said about adding a piece of information to it so that it's looked at through a strategic plan and a long-term lens. And realistically speaking, this might be on the list of things to do, but don't expect it to be done for a year or two. The long-term addition of information would be very helpful on that.
Deputy Mayor Kaiser?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to agree with a comment that's already been made a couple of times. It's the reports that we see that we actually just started getting earlier this year. I think it was June or July. We started getting those monthly activity reports by department. It was a nice addition, and I kind of like those. I like the way it's organized. In terms of this document, I recognize the need for you and for your senior management to have this type of document and this guide, but in terms of council thinking and from where we're sitting at this table, I look at the list of things, I could almost break them out into 3 or maybe more areas. One of the areas is sort of an internal operational items. So like data management efficiencies, modernizing VADM, and things like this. These aren't things that council needs to necessarily know about other than budgeting, if it's going to have a budget item associated with it. Otherwise, it's kind of an internal operational thing. There's other things in here that are more vision items, like the strategic plan, facilities review. Those things are kind of high level. Where's the new administration building? Is that going to happen? And then there's the asset items like the official plan, the strategic plan, the master plans. And if you broke it out into sort of subcategories to this, there's things that we need to have more hands-on and other things we really don't need to know about on an ongoing basis other than at budget time, for example. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just throwing that out there, just to maybe simplify the thinking around it. And other than that, I mean, to know that, to see this on a monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly basis with the little green light saying we're on track, orange light that it's been stalled, and the red meaning it's on hold or delayed or whatever, front burner, mid burner, back burner, however you want to categorize it. Keep it simple. I mean, don't overwhelm us with 18 columns and a whole lot of things. I recognize 40 is a lot. I don't want to see 57. We saw 57 a couple years ago, and we got a talking to about 57. We don't want to do that to staff either. I mean, we all have these ideas and things come to us from the community, what have you. But we also need to get told, we got a lot on our plates, what do you want to prioritize? So having this come before us on an annual basis, for council to see this sort of thing on an annual basis is great. Lets us know where the workload is and what kind of burdens staff have and what we can and can't take on in the near term or the long term, or what can be pushed off or whatever. But I think breaking it down into subcategories of these are the things we really need policy and direction on, and these are the things that we're doing behind the scenes, just as a thought process.
So am I hearing that, if I may, John, the activity reports or something that the individual activity reports that I guess we did start in about July, am I hearing that council likes those continued?
Yes, please.
It's the pleasure of council. Yeah, that's fine.
As far as, I think as far as the others, you've certainly heard that's one heck of a wish list, which we've all brought up to you, and you and I have certainly discussed it. And I'd like to see it updated, maybe not monthly, but quarterly. And as Councillor McCormack says, we lost a lot of things in shuffles, that they were important, and we were on them, and then other stuff got in the way, and then we had to crawl to get back there. So, and I think that's why these activity reports. But if there's a, as you say, it's at council's wish, but if there's a reason that for staff they don't work, we need to hear that. But for council, I really like them. They're once a month.
Okay. So I think, if I may, you would never see another list of 40 items. So this is just this is an initial list of things that we are looking at doing over the next couple of years without the guidance of a strategic plan. So this is just to give council an idea, and if there's something in there that you thought we should be doing that you don't see in any way, shape, or form, then this would be the time that you would say, to Councillor Pennell's point, I don't see whether there's a boat launch issue on there or not, which we're obviously going to deal with anyway. but it's really to give council the opportunity to say, these are some of the things that we're looking at. Some of these things are actually in your budget briefings you've been had over the last couple of years as well, or the last couple of weeks. So again, it's just an initial foray into the list of things, those types of activities that staff are going to start undertaking in 2022. I think to the issue of council's concerns about things being brought up and then dropped or forgotten, or however you want to characterize it, I think one of the things that we're doing as a staff is we meet, and I think I've mentioned this before, we meet, my senior leadership team meeting is after every council meeting and then prior to the one coming up. And that's where we start assigning those tasks and making sure we do track them. I can't speak to how that was handled 2 years ago. But rest assured, those things that come out of council meetings through resolution are tracked, and we do our best to make sure that we actually follow up on those as best we can.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. When I look at the priority list, most of this appears to be with regards to internal management. Where does a vision and mission statement, where do projects that matter to the people in the community, where do those fall into this?
So those, through your worship, those would come out as your strategic plan, right, in terms of the mission, vision, articulation, and that's, we've seen that in the project plans of, I think there's 9 proposals so far for the RFP for the strategic plan. So it's broken out into, affirming what council and residents are looking for a strategic plan, then you get into a visioning exercise, into a mission in terms of, what is Napanee now and what do you want the town of Greater Napanee to look like in 5 or 10 years? And from those strategic objectives and outcomes, you drill down and start prioritizing the work that needs to be done to get there, right? So this is, I would suggest there's a lot of things on that list that do reflect some of the issues that residents have been looking for when you look at, how do we as a municipality interact with community activities? What are the levels of activity that we want to maintain? We're talking about things around traffic, or not traffic, but transportation studies, how we partner with the county to deliver activities. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that does relate. There's stuff in there that talks about how do we better serve residents through our service standard articulation, how do we serve customers better. So I think there's a lot in there that talks about how we serve residents and what residents have been asking for. It's just our initial take on it without having gone through the full consultation process, if that makes sense.
Councillor Richardson. Oh, sorry. Go.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That makes
No.
perfect sense, and that was what I was expecting to hear. I think I just needed to have the people in the public hear it as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Richardson.
And I think maybe sometimes we're luckier than we are good, because I think at our next meeting, we've got our FICE report coming, and it addresses some of these things. So it's through the eyes of independent people from another community. So I think our timing is very well with this. So.
Good. So out of this then, we're going to receive for information the attached report and priority list. But we're going to stay with the management reports, the activity reports, because that was part of it. But before I call for a motion on this, I did go through the priority list. I just sat and sort of split it up into pages, and I just, in an email, sent John notes on thoughts. The rest of you do the same thing. I mean, it's amazing how much we're alike, but it's amazing how much we differ on how we look at things, and that gives Sean some more history to work with as well. So it's time consuming, and some of us are long-winded. 2 of us are, but it certainly helps John go through it. So I'm going to ask for a motion to receive for information the attached priority list, and further that council provide feedback to staff at the next regular meeting or before, which would be even better, such that a formal priority list can be developed for 2022 and presented to council at the regular meeting on January the 24th. But we will still look forward to getting the activity reports moved by, and that's just once a month. Moved by Councillor McCormack, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Any comments or questions? Madam Clerk, did you get through the rambling what we need?
Yes, I did, thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you, John. It's a lot of information, every bit of it important. I think the thing that once you put it on that kind of a chart, it looks like the CAO area updates, which we all didn't like. So I think that's part of the problem with that. Okay. Development services, 12.2, development services, Mill Street vacant lots. Michael, is this you?
Your Worship, nothing to add beyond what's in the report. The request is from Mr. Ken and Mrs. Ken Morrison, Mrs. Kim Morrison, regarding removal of former consent conditions that were appended to a deed in 1995 for 2 lots that were severed from 232 Dundas Street West. They're on the southerly side, so on the Mill Street side, I believe it is there. The lands at 232 Dundas Street West were formally designated as a heritage building. That designation was removed in 2016, but it appears that these former conditions that would have been applied as a result of the heritage designation, they were not removed from title. So this is just a matter of cleaning up title ahead of the transfer for those 2 vacant lots.
Questions or comments? We had this happen at Stevenson House too, which is a designated building, and they severed off a lot. And we ran into this too. Okay. Council's wishes. Councilor Richardson.
Just a quick question. I mean, obviously, back in 1994, folks were very passionate about the heritage, because when we start dictating as to colors of paint and stuff, it's very could be very cumbersome. I guess the only question I have is with respect to number 2, the second condition, which is the dwelling units on the lot shall not be any less than 1,700 square feet. The lots that are there now, could you explain to us, we're not going to put up apartment buildings in these lots. What are the conditions or the size of the lots that are there? And in keeping with the fabric of the neighborhood, when the lots are developed, will they be developed as single-family dwellings, or can they be developed as something else?
Your Worship, let me just take one moment and confirm the zoning on the property. I believe it's residential type 4, which permits semi-detached singles and semis. But based on the size of the lot, I just want to double check. So it's residential type 4 zoned, which could accommodate a semi-detached or a single detached dwelling with possibly a secondary unit contained within such building. Based on the size of the lots, I would foresee single detached dwellings, but there is the possibility of semi-detached being constructed. The zoning bylaw would still continue to apply insofar as the amount of lot coverage that could be applied, meaning the size of building. You can't have a monster building covering all of the green space on the lot, for example. But in keeping with the area, the size of the building that could be accommodated on the lot would be more or less consistent with the area. And in the greater area here, there are a few dwellings that do have more than one unit within the building. Typically, as a secondary unit, there's one newly constructed semi-detached that is further west from this site. But overall, I would foresee the development of single detached dwellings here, but there could be a semi-detached accommodated on the lots as well.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from Council? Councillor Pennell?
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Michael, I think that you answered my question by saying that on the last line here on the report is that the zoning bylaw will continue to apply. and regulate construction of new dwellings. I think that's what you just spoke of. The existing bylaw is going to apply.
That is correct. The current in effect bylaw.
Thank you.
Will continue to apply.
Council? So, Michael, there's no infill, there's no restrictions as to design. There obviously, I guess what it is an infill bylaw. There's nothing that, anybody can put whatever they want there as long as it meets building code, as long as it meets setbacks, as long as it meets every other qualification that they have to have, but it can be aluminum and glass.
That's correct. The exterior, the appearance of the exterior of the building is not regulated under the zoning bylaw, which the intent for these former conditions of consent were to restrict the appearance of the building. But in staff's opinion, since 232 Dundas Street West, the heritage designation was repealed from that parent lot. There's some precedence there about this request.
Okay. Council's wishes. You do have a recommendation before you that council receive for information the development services report, and further the council authorize the removal from title of the conditions associated with the 1995 consent approval of the 2 vacant lots immediately south of 232 Dundas Street West. Council, what do you want to do here? Moved by Councillor McCormick, staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Norrie. Any further comments or questions? If not, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. 12.3, financial services, outstanding taxes and property sale. Sorry. A report that had come forward from financial. Does council have any questions of Mr. Dauber concerning this? If not, no, you do have a recommendation before you that we receive for information the report. Moved by Councillor Pennell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Legislative Services, Election Matters Update. Madam Clerk.
Your Worship, I can speak to some of the comments that were raised in the deputation now, if you wish, or I can take questions from council.
Good, thank you.
So to start out with the question of wards, I definitely concur, and I believe Mr. Pinson agrees that a ward boundary review is an important exercise for this municipality. The ward boundaries have not significantly changed since 2003, but it is a process that takes a long time to do it well. You need to be looking at your historic and projected population trends for the next 10 to 15 years. You should be doing community consultation. You should be looking at your community fabric and what areas and interests need to be represented and what looks like fair for the community. You might want to look at the question of how the community feels about wards versus at large, and that should include a significant public education component and council education. I definitely agree it is important work, but there is no way to do that well and do it in 3 months. If council passed a resolution tonight and said we want to dissolve the ward boundaries, bring a bylaw to the 14th, you pass it on the 14th. If one person appeals it within the mandatory 45-day appeal period, it does not take effect until the 2026 election. I can take more questions on that if you want, but it should be done, but it needs time to do it. Most communities did theirs in 2020 for this election.
Council, certainly. Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Madam Clerk, I was going to ask you the question as to why we can't do anything about the wards, but you answered that in great detail. Thank you very much. And I agree with everything you say, how it should be done, with great consultation and stuff. Myself, when I first started to run for council, I thought at large would be the best thing. But once you're in here, you know, you actually are at large once you're on council, because you do get people calling you from other wards and such, but also you are giving the residents of your ward security of who they can call. So that's my little stint about ward systems on that. I do have a question for you though, if we could go forward just on the election signs on that. I see that there's probably something in the works to reduce the amount of signs that were on the last election. They did get kind of crazy on public lands. And I know that being in real estate, that the county has a bylaw for signs that they cannot put real estate signs on the end of county roads directing into a property. Majority of realtors follow that. Some realtors from out of town don't. But my problem is with the county's bylaw is that they have the bylaw and there's out of town people that put signs up and they're not looked after, they're not taken down, they're not fined, they're not that sort of thing. So that's the problem that I would have with this election, with having a bylaw stating that we can't put signs up on that property. Some people don't want to put your sign on their lawn because what their neighbors think or whatever the case may be that way. And then we look at people that are fortunate enough to have billboards in this community, and we would be separating the haves and the have-nots, I think, on that. So I would really like to take a better look at for election bylaws for the signs, other than just saying, no, we can't do it. And also, if we did do a bylaw, if the county did it, then this would have to also apply to the hands that feed them as well, feed us, which is provincial and federal as well, when those elections come up. Thank you.
To speak to that? Sure. So just for council's understanding, the clerks of the 4 lower tiers and the county meet on a regular basis, and this was I think this was instigated by the clerks to make all 5 municipalities in line, right? So some municipalities have more strict bylaws than we do. Ours is vague in its wording, and the county had it pretty clearly worded, but I think that was right, that it was to get them all sort of pulling in the same direction.
Through your worship, yes, that was the intent, was that anywhere within the county, the rules about signs would be the same. Our sign bylaw maybe wasn't enforced this way in the last election, but it does actually say that election signs are only permitted on private property. You just have to read through quite a few definitions to get to that understanding. If obviously the bylaws are still set by council, so if that is not the will of council, we can look at doing something different. The county's bylaw would apply to county roads, and our bylaw would apply to municipal roads, sidewalks, parks, all of it. As a general rule, you don't want political signs, especially in your parks and other public spaces, because that can be seen as a political endorsement by a public entity, and you don't want anything that looks like that.
Thank you.
Can we try to, I'm going to make a suggestion here. If we can try and go through the signs, the wards, and not vote on it or talk, let's just talk about it one at a time. So we started out with wards. Can we just stick with that just for the time being? Go ahead, Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Starting with the wards, I'll support the clerk's recommendation. This is a long process, and we shouldn't just wing it. So in my opinion, it's not going to be something that's going to change for the next election. And at the clerk and the CAO's pleasure, they should start looking into that when it's appropriate for the following term.
Okay, anyone else on the wards want to speak to it? I'll go to you, Councillor Norrie, and then I'll go to the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just quite simply, you're aware I'm in favor of wards. They're out of whack right now, it's very obvious. So they need to be tweaked, but I believe in wards. I'll treat it to my past life. You had an area, it was your beat for a year in Hamilton. That was yours, but you still worked in the whole city of Hamilton if something happened. But you owned that beat and that beat owned you. And as Councillor Pinnell said, there's an ownership, and you walk around your ward and people talk to you as their councillor, and it gives them, I think, a bit of a good feeling. But we still work for the town as a whole. So that's my feelings. But they need to be tweaked.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm in agreement again. I was in favor of the wards all along, and I'm glad to see that eyes are opening to the value of wards. But as Councillor McCormick pointed out, if we can make a recommendation or suggestion, I guess going back based on the conversation we had in the last term of council, I really thought we were going to review it in this term. I don't know if COVID can be blamed for that or other things that just got in the way or forgotten about. It fell off the chart, I guess. But if we can make that polite recommendation that it be reviewed, certainly the boundaries, if not wards in total, at the minimum, the ward boundaries need to be reviewed, and maybe then at the same time it can be a public consultation process which looks at the value of the wards versus at large, and look at the whole big question in the next term. But obviously there isn't time for that this term.
Did you have your hand up, Councillor Johnson?
I did, yes. With regards to the ward system, I think I appreciate the point of view of the clerk and the time involved in analyzing the whole process. But I'm wondering if the question comes up, should we stick with the ward system or go to elections at large? If that question doesn't need to be answered first before you start a ward boundary review, because if the community wants elections at large, there is no point in doing a ward system review. Is it appropriate to do a question like that on the ballot? Or is there too much of an education process that should happen with the public before the election?
And I'm just going to jump in and say I think we would need the information as to how balanced they are. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm not mistaken, all our wards have some, and I hate these two words, we said we weren't going to say them.
Don't say it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Those two places.
They don't all.
Pardon?
They don't all. Ward 4 doesn't.
Ward 4, you have no rural?
I have no R.
Oh, sorry, I said it.
I'm all you.
Come on, you.
Go ahead, and then I'll go to Councillor McCormick.
Okay. I think, too, we're really fortunate in this council that all the members of council think of the community as a whole first and foremost, and then think of what's best for their wards and how to best represent their people at a secondary level. Not that's, I think we have seen it work very, very well for us. If you have a councillor who does not represent a ward or who works only at large and has special interests, we can see the system work in a bad way as well. So I think all of us are a little bit prejudiced for wards simply because it has worked well for us, because we all take what's important to the whole community at heart first and foremost.
No, good point. Councillor McCormick, and then Councillor Richardson, I'll go to you.
I would just like to say I'd be cautious about putting a question on the ballot this time around before having an education process, because to put something out like that, you might not get the response that would turn out to be what people really wanted. Sometimes just the flavor of the moment, people could go one way and then realize afterwards, well, that's not what I expected. So I think we should have an education process before we would put out a question like that.
Certainly. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just going to reiterate pretty much what we've heard here already tonight. I am a big proponent of the ward system. I think this council has shown that the ward system can work. I think it's important to this community. This community is even though we may not look at it or think of it that way, it's a very diverse community. Ward 1 is substantially different than Ward 4, which is substantially different than Ward 2, just if nothing else by geography. So I think it's important for our community to do that. So I concur, we haven't got the time to do that right now. And worse than not doing it at all is doing it in a rush and getting it wrong. So I think the clerk is bang on by saying it just isn't going to fit into our agenda between now and October 24th. So I would support the staff report with respect to the ward system. So, or the concept of putting it over to do it right.
I don't think I'm mistaken in that before the 2018 election, we did have the public meetings on the ward system, did we not?
Yes.
Yeah, they were very extensive, because I remember you getting up to speak at it down at South Fred, and we had one at South Fred and one at the SPC. Both of them extremely well attended. And it came back with a resounding, not a resounding, certainly tipped toward people wanting the wards. And I think that you've all said something that's 100% right. This council, with no disrespect to past councils, has operated as one. It really doesn't matter. And I think a lot of that has been partially, well, more than partially. The reporting issue has brought us all together. We're all seeing what's happening in everybody else's ward without even having to communicate, and we're all learning something by it. We're finding things that sort of click, and you all know that I have been an at-large supporter for ages, but I guess as when I found out what it was like to campaign for mayor and deputy mayor, you think, well, maybe everybody else should see that. But certainly this council, and it may not hold true for the next council, has worked as a unit. There hasn't been the two you and our words that have been used very much. We all look at it as it's a municipality. So I would agree. So I'm going to put that down as part of that we will stay within the ward system. What were the other things that we needed to decide? Ranked ballots aren't going to be part of it.
Voting method.
Oh, the voting method was the other, but there was something else that we had spoken of too. Oh, election signs, yeah. Okay, so let's go to if we can just try to organize it this way, if this is all right with you, Madam Clerk, because this is yours. The election signs. What are council's feelings on the election signs? Not much we can do about billboards. Deputy Mayor, you go ahead, and then I'll go to Councilor Richards.
I'm absolutely, thank you, Your Worship. I'm absolutely in favor of private property only. Number one, I don't like signs. I don't like the sight of them. I don't like the noise of them. I certainly don't like the clusters of them here and there. We saw it in various places around the municipality at the last election where they'd be, and even like you said in the provincial and federal elections, they get bunched into groups and it's just noise. I also think that there's a lot more value, and I'm gonna share a little anecdote. My youngest is 21, and she's voted since she was 18 in a few different elections. And when she votes, I ask her if she wants to share with me, and she often shares with me how she voted, and I ask her why, and she said, well, I saw their sign, so I recognize the value in the sign for the voter, but more importantly, she said, I saw where the sign was, and because I saw it on that lawn and that lawn and that, and we know them and we're friends with them, and I think we get along with them. If they go with that person, I can go with that person. There's a value and a greater value to having them on certain private properties of people that are known or known or familiar to you than having it just scattered on public property. I also don't think they belong on roadsides, especially when it's, I own a lot of roadside. It's not, I think of it all as my front lawn, but a lot of people maybe don't. They think of it as across the road from their property. It's just a field. And I get bothered when I see signs on my property, because it just looks like road frontage. Yeah, it's 6 kilometers of road frontage, but it's still my front lawn. So anyways, that's just my personal bent on it.
Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I think I have to go along with Councillor Pennell's view on it. I mean, the signs are a very important part of who we are and what we do as far as elections go. I have to admit, I was very surprised. When I first got involved in this gig, I sort of underestimated the value of a sign until you start knocking on doors. And I don't know how many times it was suggested that we saw the name Terry Richardson on the sign. We didn't know whether it was the same Terry Richardson. And I thought, for goodness sake, there can't be two of us. But it was the value of the sign. And sometimes the high movement areas or the high traffic areas are places that people see them. That may be the only place that they see them. So if I thought for a minute that after the election, signs were left in ditches and stuff. But I mean, many times I talked to people that they would pick up a competitor's sign and bring it to them, and then the competitor would pick up your sign and bring it to you. So the issue of the trash or the collateral damage of the election, I don't think it exists in this community because, like I say, I know I picked up many signs from competitors or from or people that ran at different levels. And they did for me as well. So I don't see that as being too big an issue, but I think with the community, we've got an aging community, we have a changing community that may or may not be as electronically involved with Facebook and stuff like that what they do see is when they go to the grocery store, they see the sign at the corner of the yard and they say, oh, okay, Ward 2, I'm in Ward 2. I see the guy's name, and it's a name recognition kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of value that can be put into signs. And I have to agree with the deputy on this as well, is that front yard signs are very important. I had someone say to me many years ago that you have to remember that people vote for people, intersections don't. And so it's very important when signs are on particular yards. So. But I don't want to underestimate or devalue the fact that a high traffic area can be very beneficial to a candidate. So,
Can I just ask a question here, because we are within the ward system, and so if you're running in Ward 2, chances are remote that you're going to put Jim Kimmett Boulevard and 41 or Center Street. You wouldn't put a sign there.
Other than maybe the driveway to the arena, I may.
Okay. I just hadn't thought about that until right now. Who else wanted to speak on the signs? Councillor McCall.
Just quickly, Your Worship, as long as we're all on the same playing field and everybody is guided the same way. I mean, I liked the way it was the last time. I thought it was, appropriate. But whatever changes are made, if everybody's guided by the same rules, it's fair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I also like the way it was last time. I like the mix of roadside signs and signs in people's yards. I'm wondering if one of the problems that we're seeing, and this is more so in higher levels of government where people are putting like 6 signs in a row with the same name on them, if we could protect ourselves a little bit by putting a restriction on you can't have a sign more than, 50 feet from another sign or from another one of your own signs, something like that, if that would be helpful. And I don't know what a good size distance for that would be. Or if we just want to put it, anybody who's running cannot have more than 200 signs out in the community, and then they have to be more careful about where they put them. There's abilities to monitor it that way. And when it comes to picking up signs and helping signs, we also fixed other people's signs.
Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
2 questions. Number 1, is there a time frame that we need to answer this question? And I'll before I let that one answer, I'll ask the second one. At some point, maybe it would be helpful if we knew what the other municipalities were looking at or what they currently have, so that if the goal is to be parallel across the 4 lower tiers in the county, it'd be good to know where we're aiming for, where others are aiming for, or starting from. So, but then what's the time frame to do this?
So Madam Clerk, what's the latest that we can make the changes? December 31st, right? I think.
Through your worship, I am seeing December as the timeline for signs that most communities are using. I know the other municipalities are hoping to pass their bylaws at their December meeting, but I can certainly speak to those clerks after this meeting and see where their councils are at.
Council, do you want to wait and see what the other municipalities are doing? Because, I mean, we don't know county roads from township roads and town roads and so on, once we get out of our municipalities. So, okay, so we'll leave, unless somebody else wanted to speak to the election sign thing, because just for the public's information, and Madam Clerk, with your permission, I'd kind of like to do these as separate decisions so that it is really spelled out for both you and the public, okay? So we've got the ward boundaries and the wards questions, and we're going to leave the election sign thing until we find out, if that's okay with everybody, find out what's going on in the other municipalities. Certainly, sitting around the table at County Council, I've got to say that there was great support for not wanting to see signs all over the place. So, but that doesn't mean that we have to follow suit. If we want to be the odd person out, then so be it. Questions on the ballot, discussion on that. And that we must have no later than March the 1st, right?
Yes, Your Worship, this is really here just for council and the public's information. If anyone was thinking about putting a question on the ballot, to remind you of the time limits for doing that, but certainly no decision on that needs to be made tonight. I believe we also did need to go back to voting method.
Oh, yes. Okay, so voting method. Can we have a conversation, please, on that? Yeah, Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Worship. So as it's noted in the report, we were lucky that we didn't, our internet didn't fail us as it happened in other municipalities. So who's to know next time around how it's going to be? Being in more of a rural community, I would like to see voting at the local fire hall the way it was in the past, because there's a lot of people that are not internet savvy. There's a lot of seniors that would feel more comfortable going and completing a ballot, and that's what I heard last time. But it's just offering that as part of the conversation.
So in each ward, just like we take them into the long-term care homes and so on, that in each ward there would be a place where people could go in, and would they be doing it electronically? Would they be assisted to do it electronically?
Possibly. They just don't have that ability at their residence, and they're not comfortable with it. And the telephone system was the same kind of idea. People are intimidated by that kind of thing. And if you're of a certain age, your whole electoral life has been going to a location and filling out a ballot, or if it's on an electronic device. But I would like to see that.
Yeah, Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, Worship. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we did have somewhat of a hybrid process the last time, did we not? That you could do the electronic voting or do it by phone, but we did have, I'll say, a hard location to go to, if I'm not mistaken. And
the advanced polls, yeah.
Only one.
But it was only one. I like the idea, the concept of the hybrid process, just because we are in a bit of a transition with respect to the baby boomers are still around, but the younger generation probably will never ever see a hard copy ballot. But if we could maybe expand, just because of the geographics, the demographics of our community, if we could, and I'm not sure what the cost would be, but if we could expand rather than just hang out, I think it was at the SPC if I'm not mistaken, but have something, central, north, and south, it may be of great value
But it would still be electronic.
But I would say electronic, I think, is probably the best way to go at this point. I mean, we get results immediately, right? So, and when we get to recounts are much easier too, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
And that's what we do at long-term care, Riverine, I think some of the seniors residents. So Madam Clerk, what would that involve? Is that something that it is an option?
Through your worship, that is absolutely an option. I am realizing I should have expanded more on this report when I wrote it. It is my intention that we would have more physical voting locations than we did in the last election. And I agree, I was looking at a map and thinking somewhere in the south, somewhere in the north, trying to limit the driving distance that those residents at the furthest points in the municipality would have to drive if they did want to come in for physical voting assistance. The cost to that would be your extra staff to run those advance polls. I would probably schedule them as advance polls instead of polls on election day. But again, that is sort of alluded to in that comment that says you'll be getting a bylaw recommending advance poll locations and dates sometime in the next couple of months, but that's definitely going to be a consideration.
So, Jessica, when do we have to decide on the voting method? By what date?
I believe it is. So you don't have to decide until May 1st, but for planning purposes, I would really like to know sooner than that if we are going to be changing voting methods or adding an additional voting method.
Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, through your worship, to Madam Clerk. I know that when I volunteered my time for the federal election, I worked the advance polls and it was all paper. And then I was recalled back in on election night to count my poll. Those ballots were kept for, I do believe, 7 years to go back on. If we do the electronic, how long is that saved for and where is it saved?
Through your worship, there is a statutory requirement in the act that sets out how long you keep your election materials for. The date changes. If your election is contested, you have to keep it for longer, but if it is not, there is a set date, and I want to say it's 6 months after the election, but that is a guess, and I would have to double check that in the legislation. Everything is stored on a secure server that's with the, I believe it's with the service provider. It's not out, like, we couldn't go in and tamper with those records in the interim if that is what a concern is, but it is not retained indefinitely.
Okay, and it's not retained by the town of Greater Napanee, then? It's retained by the service provider, as you mentioned.
I believe so. I will double check that and confirm.
Thank you.
Okay. What things does council want to decide on this evening?
December 14th.
We can put it on until December 14th, and we may get some feedback from, as a matter of fact, I can almost be guaranteed we will get some feedback from people that are listening tonight and have concerns about it. Just as long as we don't leave our clerk in a lurch. We know that the wards, the ward boundaries or the at-large, it just can't fly because it's not fair to anybody. The election signs would be nice to have the background on what the other municipalities are doing, what we might hear from other people, and what we think is right for our own municipality. The voting method, I've always thought that the internet and telephone voting was great, but I like the suggestions of some advance, easier access, north, south, center, to be able to make it work would still be the push button sort of thing, not paper. Because I've been involved in a paper election that it was just fed through and it was close and it was fed through again and it was exactly the same numbers. So it's the same as the electronic. So at this point, are we looking that we're going to receive this for information and ask the clerk to come back with further information on what the other municipalities are doing, and then we'll decide as to whether we will be part of that. Voting method tweaked to give better access to a report or some suggestions on the voting method that would give better access to those that aren't comfortable with voting, don't have the capability with internet or telephone and so on, and whether it would be advanced. And I guess those are the three things that we need to do. Am I right? Have I hit them all, Jessica? All the three things that you need?
I believe so.
Councillor Johnson, I need somebody to move that shortly too.
I will move that first.
Thank you. And seconder, please, Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Okay.
And then I just wanted to make a comment. I completely support the idea of having multiple locations, but the election is a budget line item.
Yeah.
Do we need to adjust that number at all if we have more than one location, or is the cost not enough to worry about?
Through your worship, council has set aside reserves every year for the election, and I will confirm the numbers, but I don't believe the costs for running additional advance polls would be substantial enough to impact that reserve amount.
Thank you, that's excellent.
Okay, so everybody good? There's been a lot of information that's put out in front of us. We've all been through an election once. It's important that we set it up for the next one that's fair to everybody and that has been thought through. So even though it looks like we're putting it off to the 14th, I do think it's, in my opinion, the best thing to do. I'm going to call a question. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Jessica, thank you for that awesome report, which just had us ask more questions. .5, and then we're going to follow it up with 13.2. Legislative Services Bylaw 2021-0055 to declare surplus and sell PIN 45087-0121. You do have a recommendation before you that council receive for information the Legislative Services Report Bylaw to declare surplus and sell PIN 45087-0121, and further that council approve the bylaw subject to the following conditions. Firstly, that council consider and decide on the merits of written and verbal submissions received up to and including the council meeting. That should new information be received or further input received or raise points for further consideration, this report and opinion herein be revisited as needed. Council's wishes. Who do I go to if I need to on this? I guess that's you, isn't it? Okay. Any questions of Jessica or any comments?
Since 1966, your worship.
Yeah. Okay, you have a recommendation before you. You're moving that recommendation? Councilor
Yes, ma'am.
Marmack, seconded by Councilor Richardson. Any further comments or questions? All in favor of the motion. Motion is carried. Thank you. I'm going to go down to 13.2. Bylaw number 2021-0055 to declare surplus and provide disposition of part of West Street Plan 81 closed by bylaw 16-1966 registered as LA 44528 being part 229R 5788 and part of Front Street Plan 81 closed by bylaw 902-1990 registered as LA 181826 in the town of Greater Napanee being PIN 45087-0121 first, second, and finally passed. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councilor Richardson. All in favor of that motion. Motion is carried. Councilor Pennell can come back in the room. Please and thank you.
Doesn't want you to fall asleep.
Okay, our next is 13.1, bylaw 20210051, to appoint CAO. This was read a first time and introduced November the 9th. Council's wishes.
Second, third.
Yeah. Read a second and final time and finally passed the 23rd of November 2021. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor McCormack. All in favor of that? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Any new business? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Strangely enough, one of the topics that has come up a couple times today is the upcoming transportation report. And I've had several people speak to me about their concerns with regards to the level of taxi service we have in this community. And we have seniors who are going grocery shopping and waiting an hour, hour and a half to get picked up by taxi to get home. And I don't know who to speak to about this or how we can improve this, or if there is anything we can do. Maybe it just needs to be part of the entire transportation plan. I don't know if we have any way of communicating better with Deserano bus lines, if they can improve their service within this community to ease the pressure on the taxis. It's not that we don't have taxis, it's just apparently sometimes they're on a run to Kingston or Belleville and it takes that much time to go and come back. Is there any way we can help with this problem in our community?
I know that certainly, and I'm not going to try and answer this.
No.
Certainly pushing people to the transportation survey is important because it gives us some legs. But what I see that we need, and I know several agencies are working on it, is to try and get exactly what you're saying, that Tuesday, Thursday bus that used to travel out down, it would come downtown. It would actually, I think they stopped at Riverine. They stopped at the seniors buildings, social services seniors buildings, and they did a great job on it. And it shut down because of COVID. So hopefully that will get up and going again. But I think anything that staff can bring forward as to improve service in any kind of transportation may have to wait until we get some of this information back from the county as to what is needed and the plans for that, if that helps. Unless there's some other information that anybody can offer to help.
I don't have a magic bullet, so to speak, at this point, Your Worship, and especially with COVID numbers the way they are right now, inhibiting sort of public transit in large formats. But it's definitely something we're looking at in terms of how can we get some of those people around. But I don't have a solution right now.
I wasn't through you, Mayor, sorry. I wasn't expecting an answer. I just wanted it to be on somebody's radar.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Is it just that we're not big enough? But I'm surprised that Uber hasn't found us.
Me too.
It's bizarre because they seem to have found everybody else in the world. And they just haven't found us yet. So.
They can deliver food, but not people.
And they can deliver food every night.
Yeah.
But you can't get somebody up to the grocery store.
And I do think, as Councillor Johnson said, that part of it is fear with COVID still. Although it'd be worth it to get on a plane. Any other new business? Notice of motion. I guess, Madam Clerk, have we dealt with that then? Do we need to go further into this? Do we need to acknowledge the notice of motion?
Your Worship, the notice of motion can sit on the agenda for 3 meetings and automatically be withdrawn, or it can be withdrawn by the councillor who put it forward if he feels the matter has already sufficiently been addressed. Or
Point well taken. I'll remove it, since we dealt with it earlier, and we're going to hear back mid-February with further information. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any statements by members? Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two, actually three. Now that we've passed the motion, I'd like to welcome the new CAO. That's just a little bit of humor. Big bright lights downtown. They're just about wrapped up. I saw staff today working on a couple buildings to the east. I just wanted to say that there's obviously a lot of volunteer efforts and staff, including the community and corporate services staff who organize all of those parts. And I want to extend thanks. I think it looks great yet again. Another good year. I was able to help out one afternoon, and I know Councillor Purnell helped out a great deal, and other councillors did too. Standing on the street, talking to people walking by, people from outside the community who come in, they look up, they wonder what we're doing, they think it's really wonderful. And I just find it a really positive thing for our community, and I hope it can continue. Little glitches at the start, getting volunteers out to get it to happen, but it wound up and it got done, and I'm just very happy with it. So many thanks. Second one is the Parade of Lights. I want to say thank you to the council and also all the staff present and the staff not present. We put together a committee. The committee is functioning well. Councillor Purnell and yourself and three staff members, one of which is now on mat leave. We're putting our heads together. We covered a lot of ground in a short time. We've organized a lot. There's a 50 plus floats, and I put floats in quotes because there's a variety of float types going in the parade. I think we've worked very well together, and a lot of positive support from the community. And I think the 50 floats speaks a lot to that because they jumped on it. I mean, we had 40 by the end of the second week or more, and a lot of positive feedback, a lot of positive reaction. Obviously, this is one of those community events that returns us to more normal from this pandemic and everything, but it's at the right time of the year, and it's been very positive and steamrolling ahead. I actually was visited today in my workshop by Mr. and Mrs. Claus. Very excited about what's coming up at the end of next week. So December 4th, 5:30 start from the usual route, starting from the high school, and we're very excited for it. And again, I've got council support helping that. And I say I'm not doing it alone, but obviously I was the one who stamped my feet and threw a temper tantrum and got it to happen, and I'm very pleased that it is. And I think everybody else is very pleased, and I just want to say many thanks to everybody involved. Obviously, we've had some key members of staff who've been very interested and very supportive and very willing. And this week we had members from facilities and from roads at the committee. People go outside their staff hours to do what it takes. This is a community event, and our staff work and live in the community, and they're willing to do their parts too. So just many thanks to all.
Good. And I think certainly I say this on behalf of all of council. Max, it was good that it's good that you kicked it off and stamped your feet and so on. It worked well, and it has been amazing to see it come together, and the support that we get now. We just the next thing we have to really be careful with, and I'm not going to bring a downer to this. I watched the Kingston one the other night, and they had a lot of people there. KFL&A at this point is still recommending that those that cannot socially distance on the floats should be masked. Physically distanced, and the same with those in the crowd. But that's not something that I'm going to make ruin something good. Yes, we're outside. Everybody has different beliefs, but our numbers are rising terribly, and we really need to make sure that we're careful. And I know that we will be.
I just, if I will, I'll back that up and say that we were in consultation with the health unit. They did express the requirement that on the float, if you're not from the same family and can't distance, you should be masked up or reduce your numbers. If there's any interactions with the crowd, there will be, for example, the dairy board will be handing out milk. Some people will be handing out candy or whatnot. Those people are supposed to be wearing masks. The public are supposed to be wearing masks. Interactions are supposed to be brief as possible. But again, I think for the most part, the gatherings on the street tend to be familiar people in their groups and spread out over distance. We're definitely communicating those requirements forward to all of the participants. There will be signage on the street the night of. I think we're taking the necessary precautions. I think it's also, 2 weeks later than the Kingston one, it's going to be 2 weeks cooler. Maybe there'll be more scarves worn and a little bit more huddling than you might have seen there.
Yeah. And please know that I say that with the utmost respect, trying not to bring it downer, but we've got to get out from underneath this whole thing. And well done, it's really come together quickly. Any further statements by members? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn into closed session pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act to discuss a personal matter about identifiable individuals. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, Councillor Richardson, all in favor of that motion. Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, coming out of, no, not quite.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay. Coming out of closed session, I need a motion, please, to rise and report. And that all recommendations made within closed session be hereby adopted. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Fennell. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Within closed session, council received the closed session received and approved the closed session minutes from November the 9th, and also received information regarding a personal matter about an identifiable individual and gave staff direction. Confirm proceedings, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of Town of Greater Napanee. Councillor Richardson. Councillor Norrie. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor McCormack. Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thanks, staff. Thanks, council. See you at the parade.